Crypto has been promising mainstream adoption for years, but for most people, it still feels out of reach. I'm Lianna Adams, and today I'm joined by Debra Nita Ravindran, Associate Director and Head of Growth at YAP Global, to talk about what actually has to change for crypto to move beyond early adopters and into everyday life. Welcome, Debra.
Hi, Liana. Great to be here.
Yeah, really great to have you here. Maybe we could start with your professional background and tell us a little bit more about your journey.
Of course, sure. I essentially help. I'm associate director at a PR agency. We help our clients build their reputation by, bringing their news to the media and getting media coverage and helping them really think through their leadership. What do they have to say to their audiences and helping them build trust with their audiences? So mainly my expertise has been in PR and communications, although I started my career actually with a law degree and I went into business, which is what I was doing in Malaysia before I moved to New York City to do PR.
That's amazing. So, let's get down to it, right? If crypto has been around for over a decade, why does it still feel experimental to most people?
So for me, I think it comes down to exposure. And I think a part of it is it's kind of like a marketing problem. Maybe this is a lens through which I see things, but I think it's very relatable as I have conversations with friends and family about crypto. A vast majority of what's being discussed in the mainstream still comes down to crypto prices. Like, Bitcoin hit 100,000 or Ether fell by 50%. A lot of the conversation still revolves around that and the volatility around that. Sometimes it's more than that. I mean, in the last cycle, we had, a bunch of breakout use cases like NFTs and meme coins where it became more than just about price. And this time around, we have prediction markets, with Polymarket and Kalshi really becoming more popular. But I think the vast majority of people don't necessarily relate to some of these use cases and all they see is price. So I think part of it is like an exposure and a communication problem. But a lot of things are happening behind the scenes. What they see much less of, but it's becoming more and more of a reality, is banks and fintech companies are incorporating crypto into payments. New asset classes like treasuries, commodities are being added onto the blockchain every day, but people just don't see it and they don't see that it's becoming a reality. So sometimes it can seem like it's a bit of an experiment.
Yeah, and I feel like perhaps crypto needs a bit of a rebrand, right? Because, that there's also a lot of I would say, like the scams and everything that has left a fairly bad taste, in people's mouth. But, again, like it's because they don't really know
Mhm.
all the good use cases of crypto, right? What's the biggest reason everyday users try crypto once and then don't come back, in your opinion?
Well, I can speak to what I've seen genuinely happen with people I know. And I think I would summarize it as being crypto hasn't become useful or urgent enough to most people to push them to overcome the complexity hurdle. Because I think for anyone who's ever tried to dabble in crypto, to buy a coin or to make a payment, there are still complexities involved in it. And I know that's not really saying anything new, but maybe I can illustrate with an example. So I don't know if you're like this, but whenever I'm on Instagram, I follow a couple of doctors and like medical PhDs because I'm trying to understand more about health and improve my health. And so, they talk about supplements to take, how do you improve your skin, creatine, vitamins, all of that. And I find myself, saving these posts and saying, you know what, I'm going to come back to it because it's important, but I don't really want to go through this right now. And I do the same with, say, investments that I want to explore. I want to understand stocks better. I want to understand bonds better. And I just save these things and park it somewhere in the important but not urgent category in my brain and think I'm going to come back to it. But, it takes a while for that to happen. And sometimes for some people, that just doesn't happen at all. And so I think crypto hasn't become urgent enough to make people act today, even though they understand there's something important about it. And because it requires research, because it's complex, there's a lot of it that you have to understand. So I think we've essentially put the burden of having expertise and being able to overcome inconvenience onto regular people, and most people just aren't willing to go there.
I love what you've said about, parking it, right? I look at myself and I've got so many bookmarks that on things that I'm like, yeah, okay, interested in this, but not now because it requires headspace, right? It requires time to really understand and to fully, get into the whole workings of crypto. So yeah, I love that analogy. Do you think crypto's main adoption problem is technology, trust, or relevance to real life?
I would say the one I would focus on is relevance because it comes up for me every day as I'm pitching stories to the mainstream and crypto media. And I'll give you two quick stories to illustrate this. So last week, what I do on a daily basis with my team is we take what our clients are doing in terms of the products they're releasing or the topics or trends they care about, and we pitch it to journalists so that journalists would take interest in it and write about it. And so last week I pitched a client's tech upgrade to a journalist, and her response to me was that Mm, we're actually not really doing stories like this anymore. We're focusing on stories that get more views. The second example I'll illustrate is the other day I saw a really great take on LinkedIn by an editor about PR professionals like myself. She said, it's absolutely true that relationships that PR pros like me have with media, it's really important, right? Because without the relationship, they're not going to listen to what we have to say and what our clients have to say. But she ended with this. She said the media's relationship with their audience, though, is even more important than their relationship with us. And they need to gatekeep the kind of stories their audience finds interesting or relevant. And so for me, to sum it up, it really comes down to relevance and how much millions of people should really care about what's being developed and what's being introduced.
Yeah, that makes so much sense in terms of, the way you've put it in terms of relevance. Um, like yeah, definitely, because if there's no need for it, and if it's not something that engages people, it's not going to be adopted so easily, right? So yeah, thanks for those stories. What's one thing crypto insiders underestimate about how intimidating the space feels to newcomers?
Hmm. I think many crypto insiders do underestimate this. I certainly don't take it for granted, because I experienced the pains of going through it myself. In fact, just over the last weekend, I've been in this finance mode, so I decided to refresh my emergency savings fund. And so, the guidance is put aside 3 to 6 months of your salary, just in case you have an emergency situation. And then I thought, oh man, like, okay, I'm gonna set this aside, but I don't want to earn 0.01% in my, savings account because I understand that much more than that is really possible. So I was like, okay, we got to deposit it in a lending protocol. And that essentially was my mission for the day. It was of course, I've done this many times before, but every time I do it, I feel again the pain of, buying USDC or ETH, transferring my crypto between different networks, between ETH and Base, and then depositing it on a lending protocol. I mean, some things have changed, some things have gotten better, but some things certainly haven't. And so I think maybe a lot of people working in the space, it has become like second nature to them, but they don't realize what that initial experience could feel like. I think DeFi is getting more accessible, especially with a lot of fintech like, Coinbase or Robinhood really starting to make it easily accessible to their users. But there are still a lot of challenges in just interacting with the different platforms to do what you want to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, even for me, just sending crypto to a friend, it takes me ages, right? Because I check and double check, like, like making sure that all the numbers, the wallet address, and making sure that I'm sending only $1 as a test transaction if it's a new one, right? So there's so many things to consider, right? So yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you. That it's that's one of the things that's still intimidating. How have we focused too much on innovation and not enough on reliability? Reliability?
Hmm. With this question, I would say, okay, the one thing I will say about innovation that I've found that I've been reflecting on lately, with ICOs, the initial coin offerings back in the 2016, 2017 bull cycle, DeFi summer, NFTs, Web3 gaming, meme coins, all the innovation that we saw, I think regardless of where it has landed today, because of how unique and exciting all of these use cases were, they kind of served as proofs of concept of things
Mm,
that blockchain could do that weren't yet possible in traditional systems. So, like, you could fundraise globally with ICOs, you could have digital ownership and culture building with NFTs. I wouldn't downplay people losing money through these experiments. I did not escape it myself. But I think the value of the innovation spurts was that it raised enough interest to grab the attention of like politicians, traditional finance, to understand how powerful it was and to take it seriously. And that, I think, was part of what changed the conversation and why we're where we are today. And so I think innovation, there was certainly a lot of value in those, spurts of innovation happening.
yeah, I totally agree with that as well because, without the focus on innovation, it wouldn't spark the imagination as well, right?
Hmm.
In terms of what could happen and what could be done, and what problems it can solve. Yeah. Should crypto aim to replace traditional finance or quietly become invisible infrastructure?
Hmm. I think this is the big debate, isn't it, within our
Yeah.
industry? We have,
Yes.
yeah, we have the original people, the ethos of like, we are here to create alternative systems. But then along with that came just lack of regulation, lack of adoption, a lot of sort of essentially fights to retain control over users. Um, I think in free markets, better systems win eventually. So if our system is the best, it will win. And a lot of it is already becoming invisible infrastructure, like what's happening with stable coins. I think that's been having a lot of progress in the past year or so. But if we do go back to the original problem that led to the creation of Bitcoin, right, which is corruption,
Yeah.
tyranny, the breach of public's trust. Like that is always going to be possible when there are humans involved. So I don't know about it just, I don't know about crypto just becoming totally embedded within traditional finance. I believe in alternatives. And I don't think we should discount that in our rush to be accepted by TradFi. I think the alternatives really do need to be there and need to be formidable. So yes, maybe crypto can be embedded within traditional finance, but there should be still many other viable alternatives for people to use in case, the worst happens.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, right? Like, definitely, I still remember the early days of crypto, and it's it had that maybe punk type of energy, right? Where
Hmm.
it's wanting something different, wanting something that's more fair for people and accessible to people. So yeah, I think, it's it's a funny, like, I think we should strike a balance, right? And yeah, but then at the same time, I'm with you as well in terms of, it shouldn't really uh be strictly TradFi. I think it needs to be something different because I think, with TradFi, we could be perpetuating, systemic like downfalls, right? What has to improve first for mainstream users? UX, regulation, payments, or customer support?
Ooh, can I say all of the above?
Yeah.
Um, well, one thing I can comment on though is I'm not sure if how much you think about the quote unquote DeFi mullet concept, but I think that in itself has been improving UX a lot. And DeFi mullet in a nutshell is essentially fintech in the front and crypto in the back, which is, you have fintechs like Robinhood or Coinbase or Revolut offering crypto related services to their users, but it's really crypto that's powering it in the back end. And so, in that sense, I think a lot of UX has already improved. It's just that more people have to realize that this is available. But I think the like, big thing that's gonna break it and open it up all is gonna be regulation, because regulation is just a stamp of legitimacy, especially in a space where there have been a lot of criticisms, and rightly so, because there have been scams that emerged, which is the case for any kind of technology that can essentially be created and used by anyone. There are going to be bad actors out there. So I think regulation is what's really going to break open the floodgates.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question, is volatility still the biggest blocker, or is it just a convenient excuse?
Um, I don't think like, to me personally, volatility isn't the biggest blocker. I think if we think beyond crypto, we kind of tolerate volatility all the time. Like a very simple example is, during peak periods of traffic, like Uber prices surge. We're willing to pay $20 one day and $40 another day to get from A to B. Gas prices go up, but we still have to use our cars because we need to get from A to B because, there's a need for it, there's value in it. And so I think, yes, volatility is something to take note of, but I think the bigger underlying question that people are asking is not how much exactly should the value of Bitcoin be? I think the question they're really asking is, can Bitcoin go to zero? And will Bitcoin go to zero? Is this just like a bubble that's one day going to end? And I think the reason why they may have this question and maybe some of us may not is because we see the technological innovation happening every day. We see the real projects and the real progress. We see it becoming more and more embedded into real life and to mainstream finance. But a lot of people on the outside don't really see that. And there is still a question that lingers, can Bitcoin go to zero? Rather than, is it going to go up 20% or down 50%? So I think the value question still persists. And it's more of an existential question about value rather than just, minor changes up and down. So I think that is the story that we need to still prove to most people, that Bitcoin and crypto and these blockchain systems are here to stay in the long term.
Yeah, and I think, it's really about the narrative and what um what stories are being put out, right? About crypto, to get people to focus, instead of volatility, perhaps it's focusing on something else that means a lot more to them, which, kind of, which you mentioned as well, like in terms of relevance, earlier on in the conversation. What would make a non-crypto user say, this is actually better than what I already use?
I can speak to what I think is very cool myself. I think the one of the very cool, exciting use cases is DeFi lending and DeFi borrowing. And I know it maybe sounds a little boring, but actually, uh, up until I started getting to know DeFi, I never really understood that I could borrow money against assets that I already held, like stocks or my Bitcoin or my Ether. I don't own a house yet, and I know most people know that you can use your house as an asset to borrow against, but you still need, bank accounts, you need a credit score, you need to sign certain contracts, but I never really thought that I could maybe borrow some money against the Bitcoin that I held or the stocks that I held. So I find that really exciting. And I think that's something maybe slightly unusual that most people could get pretty excited about because why let that asset just sit there without giving more value to me? And so I think when they discover that this is going to be possible, that they maybe don't need a credit card for it, they don't need a credit score, I think people are really going to jump on this bandwagon, and this is becoming more and more possible every day. I've heard of stories of people borrowing against their crypto to buy a house. I think DeFi lending as well is pretty exciting when people realize that, maybe my cash doesn't need to earn just 0.01% or 1% in my savings account. It could actually earn north of 4% still in a very low risk way. I think when they realize that and realize how easy that is, people are going to get pretty excited. And this is what I've been starting to talk to my friends more about. My friends still ask me, hey, I've been looking at my investments. I want to do more. I want to get into crypto. Can you give me advice? And I've kind of changed from saying, consider this or that asset like Ether or Bitcoin or Solana. I say, have you checked out lending protocols? Have you checked out earning yield? And I think once they realize this is going to be this, they're actually going to say, this is better than what I already use today.
Yeah, I love that. But it makes me also think about how we still need education in this space, right? And I think we should never stop educating people, because, this space moves faster than the speed of life. Um, is is
Absolutely.
is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
I think we've discussed a lot of really interesting things today. I agree with your sentiment that there is an education problem. I think there's overall a lot we have to do to really get across the value of crypto or crypto systems, and we do need to speak more in the language that ordinary people can understand. And I think we kind of need to get out of that like technological bubble and speaking in jargon and just break things down easily instead of, from the perspective of what we see and what we're doing, rather to how it can be useful to other people. So a lot of it really is communication and language and starting to build those connections with everyday people. It is a long journey, but I've personally seen so much progress, and with a lot of crypto projects that I work with, I'm really excited about what they're doing. And I think if we had this conversation in a year's time, things are going to be very, very different in a very positive way. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited as well. Thank you so much. Crypto doesn't need to be loud to go mainstream. It needs to be clear, useful, and dependable. Thanks to Debra Nita Ravindran, for joining us. Conversations like this help move the space closer to solutions that work for everyday users.